Hi, everyone. My name is Melissa Vert. I am the Fellowship and Grants Coordinator at the International Institute, and I am here to tell you today and to kick off the Fulbright season this year. I'm going to be giving you a quick presentation. My hope is that it won't go any further than about 30 minutes, but seeing as you're going to be watching this recorded version, feel free to speed up through things that you don't feel that you need to listen to. I will add, though, however, that for this particular presentation, I will be talking about things that are coming up in the very near future. So if you've already seen the basics of Fulbright and you already understand what's going on, I just wanted to let you know that there is going to be stuff at the end for that you may want to consider looking at. So this may be worthwhile to you even if you know some of the information. And without any further ado, though, let's get started. So I'm here to share with you a little bit of the pre-planning for the Fulbright U.S. student program that is run out of the International Institute of Education. And that is a contracted organization that does the predominant application process for the State Department's Fulbright program. That's why a lot of this is going to hinge on their responsibility and their timeline and some of their presentations. I did want to let you know, because this is a kickoff session, that the application itself is not yet open. So some of this information is going to change over the next few months. I may do another recording and another info session in a couple of months. But for those of you who happen to be very eager, and if you've stumbled across this video, this is an opportunity for you to start getting in gear and getting ready for the Fulbright program for the 2022-2023 program project year. Let's get started. So I would be remiss if I didn't discuss with you the fact that COVID-19 is obviously going to be modifying how some Fulbright is going. This is now no longer new. This is something that we dealt with last year, but we're kind of in the same boat as to say that, information is still evolving on a daily basis. We are very hopeful that by this summer, there's a lot more movement within the United States, and that would then mean that there's going to be a lot more movement around the globe, but we don't know what kind of a world we're going to end up in. The good news about applying for something like Fulbright right now, or considering Fulbright right now, is that, hey, any travel for Fulbright is well over a year away. You wouldn't even be beginning your program until the fall of 2022. So while you're sitting around thinking about where it is you'd like to be living or where you'd like to go once you can get out of your house, this is a really great opportunity to at least let your mind wander and at most start thinking about opportunities for you and your future career and your future desires abroad. Again, like I said, there's no way to predict where the world will be in July of 2022. I have an optimistic view, but we all know that there are other possibilities that may occur. So there's no reason to stop yourself from considering what options you have abroad. We also want to remind you that this is a great time. A lot of references or affiliates that you might be looking for, they too are also sitting and looking at their computer a lot more. So you have a great opportunity at this point in time to seek out virtual advising, connect with your professors virtually, and even do some seeking of potential affiliates abroad if that so interests you. Additionally, essay writing, what a great use of your time to sit down and think about how you want to write about what you've done thus far and where you want to go in the future. So those of you watching this video, you're on the right track. Good idea. So the place that you can go and get started now, if you are a University of Michigan student or a University of Michigan alumnus, is to go and check out our Fulbright program website. This is the website for where you can go and find all of the kind of the basic information for what we have available to you. It also will give you a bunch of different links to go and do some advising or hear more about different info sessions that'll come up. The first thing that you can do is to join our mailing list, as you see right here. That way we can reach out to you and let you know when there's going to be more opportunities or if deadlines are coming up, that sort of thing. And then once you join the mailing list, we encourage you to then visit our resource page. So this resource page will be updated. And I do want to let you know that we have a desire to change over to a Canvas page. So when that becomes available, there'll be another little bar there that you're going to be able to click and go and follow Canvas and do all sorts of work activities to prepare you for your application. But for now, the Fulbright resource site is a fantastic resource site. It's worth it to note that this is restricted to University of Michigan users only. So if you are browsing with your general Gmail or your basic user ID, you're going to have to log out of it and then log in as a University of Michigan student with your unique name, so that then you can go and see our page. When you go to that page, you're going to see all of the stuff that's available to you. And we strongly encourage you that the first step you take is to go and look at the before starting an application session. This is going to give you a whole list of things that you can start looking at and preparing for. Opportunities to think about what type of Fulbright program you're interested in, how you can begin seeking out references, what things that you should already know, how to know if you're really eligible for a specific program. This is a great place to start. I do want to point out, as you can see on this list of all of the different menu options here, that there's a lot of other great things that are available on the site. There's announcements for what's coming up, our calendar of events, different specific application information. And I also want to direct your attention to the very bottom where it says recorded webinars. You probably found this video on that recorded webinar site. I would encourage you, there are going to be some older webinars that came out last year. While we will be redoing those this year, if you want to get a jump start and you want to start thinking about parts of the elements of this program, we heartily encourage you to go and check out those recorded webinars. They may have a lot of answers for you already. And I'm particularly proud of them. You'll see more of me, and you'll see some of my colleagues there as they give out advice. Additionally, as you can see also as the contact advisor, we strongly encourage you that if you are really gung-ho about this, you stay in contact with us. We are here to help you potentially coach you through this program. All right, so what is the Fulbright program? Well, the Fulbright program was started by Senator William Fulbright of Arkansas. He had this great idea, kind of post-World War II, wouldn't it be nice, instead of engaging with other countries through war, if we sat down and actually did research with people and made an opportunity to connect culturally with these different countries as an act of goodwill and ambassadorship and promoting good education. And darn it, if the Congress at that point wasn't like, what a swell idea. So that's how the Fulbright program was born. And it was born particularly of doing research work, and it has since expanded astronomically. It is one of the biggest exchange programs now in the world. It has been it's completely national, and as I said, it comes out of the International Institute of Education in New York, a contracting organization that helps do this for the State Department. And the goal, and this is important, the goal was and always has been to increase mutual understanding between people in the United States and people of other countries through exchange. Hopefully this doesn't sound too debasing, but part of your responsibility, the whole reason you are getting this funding in the first place from the federal government, is because yes, you benefit from your research or your ability to teach English to another student or to students abroad or to do an art program, but effectively, what's the government getting out of it? You've become Mickey Mouse. You are Coca-Cola. You are the McDonald's M. You are the person who's going to showcase around the world the diversity, the intelligence, the capability, the sensitivity of the average American citizen. And that act is beneficial both for the United States and for other countries. So it's important to think about that in the grander scheme of things as you're applying. You are not applying to go and sit in an apartment or in a lab in another country and just keep yourself to yourself. Part of your job for getting this funding to go abroad is to connect with other people in that country. And if you allow that to filter through your thoughts, it will filter onto the pages of your statements. So we'll get back to that in a second, but just important to realize what the purpose of this all truly was. Let's move on. So, who is eligible for this program? Well, if you are a student currently or an alumni, you can apply to the Fulbright program through us. If somehow you came across this video and this information, you could apply not through the University of Michigan. That's totally fine. This is a national program open to all people. But if you are applying through the University of Michigan, you must be a student or an alumnus of the University of Michigan. I think up to 3 years post-graduation, you are capable of applying through the University of Michigan and utilizing the services that we have in our office, which we will discuss. It is important to note that you are not required as an alumnus to apply through the University of Michigan. You can bypass this entirely. If you are an enrolled student, in other words, a senior who is going to graduate at the end of 2020, the end of the spring of 2022, or if you're a current graduate student, you must apply through us. But if you are already a graduate, yeah, you don't have to apply through us. You must also be a U.S. citizen. Sorry, no permanent residents can take this program. If you are a permanent resident, we do have other options for you, so please contact us, but this program may not be out of your reach. You must also have a bachelor's degree by the start of the grant. So for this particular program, that means that you must have your bachelor's degree by the late summer or fall of 2022. Now, if you are a freshman, sophomore, junior who found this program and is particularly interested, don't turn off this video. This is still great. It's fantastic that you're here, and that means that you can get a jump on this as well. So make sure to listen to this stuff. You can start to compile some of your plan for how you might apply for Fulbright in the future. This is a great opportunity for you. And my apologies, I think I just said for seniors, but really, the people who will be applying this year, the earliest you can apply for this program is that you are a junior now, and that you will be a rising senior come fall 2021. Sorry, I wanted to make sure I made that clear. Additionally, you cannot have completed a PhD at the time of your application, which would be fall of 2021 for this particular program. If you will have completed your PhD by the time of application, then don't worry. There's a different Fulbright for you. I highly encourage you to reach out to us. We can point you in the direction of, say, the Fulbright Scholars Program. Similar opportunities, but is for people who have a PhD or are faculty, certain things like that. The other eligibility requirements are embedded within all of the individual programs themselves. So you have to read each program and country page in order to get a full scope of what they're looking for each particular project. And that may include language skills or previous experience. So we do want to let you know that this is kind of the basic eligibility. There may be more depending upon which program you are looking at. We also want to make sure that you understand at this point, when you're embarking on Fulbright for the U.S. student program, there are multiple opportunities. There's so many different places you can go and things you can do, but each year you can only apply for one country and one type of grant. That can seem daunting just to whittle all of this down into one spot, and we understand that. And we'll have more conversations about it in info sessions in the future. But for now, it's worth noting, eventually you're going to have to pick just one. So what do you get out of all of this? Well, you're going to get a round trip airfare. That's pretty sweet. You're going to get an opportunity to cover all of your living expenses while you're abroad. You'll get accident and sickness coverage. Now, if you have a particular illness or pre-existing condition, it is worth checking their coverage to make sure that you would be covered by this particular program. But in general, it's still a very good accident and sickness coverage. There are other potential benefits you might have. You might get research allowances. You might have enrichment activities. There may be some tuition reimbursement that's possible. There may be opportunities for study programs. There are also multiple Fulbright programs require a pre-departure. Some of them don't, but some of them do. And they may have in-country orientations. That's awesome. It's also worth it to know that there are a lot of other federal programs that are compatible with Fulbright. So that, let's say you had to go and be in Morocco and you wanted to brush up on your Arabic. If you don't go through the study program provided you by Fulbright, there are some other scholarship programs that you can apply to and still be learning a language while you're on your Fulbright. So this is a really cool program. It's important to note all of these benefits will vary by country and the type of the grant that you're getting, and that if you're doing an extensive amount of research, Fulbright may not float all of that research allowance, that research cost. So, and of course, let's get over the hump first and talk about, getting onto that application first. Where could you go? What can you do on Fulbright? The short answer is pretty much the sky is the limit, and sometimes there's even more than you thought would be available to you. So let's start with what was originally the purpose of Fulbright, which was study and research. You have an opportunity, you can create an independent research project. Personally, I think this is the coolest option. Here you are, you've potentially been studying for at least 4 years on a particular subject. You're reared up, you're ready to go, you're revved up, you're ready to go, you got all this information. Now you can put it to use. You can throw out a question and think, okay, for 9 to 12 months, I'm going to do research in this country on whatever floats my boat. One time, one of the applicants was interested particularly in going to the Andes Mountains and connecting with people who were quinoa farmers and just trying to figure out what network did they have? Did they work together on quinoa growing, and how did they keep each other up to date? What a cool question. There was another woman who went to Italy to go and restore frescoes. That's a great one to go look at. And she wanted to research how frescoes were uncovered and help with the restoration project. There was one person who wanted to go into, I think, the Vietnamese jungle and record the sounds of the jungle. I mean, there really, the sky's the limit. So this is a really fantastic opportunity if you have this idea that you want to kind of see come to life. There is also, of course, opportunities for you to do a study program. So if you just finished your undergraduate degree and you're like, okay, I can't wait, I want to get my master's degree now. First, I would say take a year, pace yourself. But after that, all right, you're ready to go and start your master's program. That's another thing that Fulbright can do for you. You can go and check out different study programs, different master's opportunities. And if you get entrance into that university and you get a Fulbright, Fulbright will essentially pay your tuition costs for that first year of your master's program. Now, I say first year, and I say that purposefully. A lot of master's programs, it's important to note when you're looking these up, a lot of these master's programs are 2 years master's programs. Fulbright may cover you for the first year, but it is notoriously difficult to get Fulbright to cover you a second time. So if you are interested in looking at the study programs, make sure you know how long that master's program might be and how much Fulbright is likely to cover, because that may change your opinion about whether or not you want to apply to that master's program in the first place, or whether or not you feel like you're going to be able to financially afford it. Just as a hint, there are out there some 1 year's master's programs, and then it makes perfect sense. Fulbright will cover that full tuition of the year. And again, there's some of these you can do in a combination. You can do some graduate research and some study program, some master's program at the same time. A lot of these are kind of design your own programs. So this would require an affiliate. We'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. There are over 140 different countries that you can apply to, and about 1,000 awards that are available. Now we're going to jump all the way to the other side and look at the English Teaching Assistantship, or the ETA Fulbright program. Now, this is a great program if you've been sitting at home in quarantine, you've been thinking to yourself, my God, I have got to get out of here. I don't know what research I want to do yet. I don't know yet if I want to go into a master's program. I do know I want to get out of here, and I do know I want to connect with people in a different culture. And this would be a really great opportunity for you. Or if you are someone who knows that in the future you are particularly interested in being an educator, this is a great program for you. So, this is an opportunity, the ETA, to assist in teaching English and American culture in other primary, secondary, university classrooms for part time. And what that means is that normally there is a official teacher in the school that you will be teaching. That's your lead. And then you will be supporting that teacher in giving students essentially an enhanced understanding of English, colloquialisms, your regular culture, the things that you did on a normal day-to-day basis while you were living in the United States. For many different countries, this is some of the first chance that these students will ever have meeting a US citizen. So that's why you're kind of this extra special cultural ambassador when you go. There are opportunities, depending on where you go, that you can also design a small scale independent project. That's kind of fun, but predominantly you are there for 1 year, or you are there for 1 year to support the education of students in rural areas to better understand English and American culture. So it's also important to note, again, I think I left this out, but for study and research, you're kind of designing the contents of your research. You get to decide where that location is, how people are going to work with you, the whole project structure. For the ETA program, you are beholden to the Fulbright centers in these countries. They will decide where it is you are going to go and teach. You can suggest places that you're going, but quite often they're going to give you an assigned placement, and it's regularly outside of urban areas. This can actually be a massive blessing in disguise. And there's no way to better learn a culture than by being in a rural area. But nevertheless, it's important to know that. The ETA program is something that has been really expanding over the last couple decades. So now they have 70 different countries that they do this in, over 900 awards, and it's growing. So if this is something that is particularly interesting to you, highly recommend that you check it out. Okay, last but not least, and I'm going to be a little bit more sparse with this particular program because they're kind of unique, but it's worth touching on, is that there are also creative and performing arts programs. So this would be if you have been studying violin for most of your life, you come out of the School of Music and Arts. If you have been doing dance, if you have been doing painting, whatever the case may be, these are your opportunities to seek out chances to train in the arts at a foreign college or conservatory. You can also train with a professional in your field in the arts. So you can, or do a combination of the two. This is normally housed kind of under the study and research portions of the program. So if you say you're particularly interested in going to Uzbekistan, but they don't seem to have a creative and performing arts program, well, that's fine. You could still apply for this through their study and research portion, because you'd effectively be studying and researching that particular art form. Again, this is a lot more of a design your own program. They all run for the same amount, about 9 to 12 months, and it's in 140 different countries. The number of awards for this can vary dramatically because it combines a little bit with study and research. And then finally, it's worth touching on, there are some really cool specific awards that are out there that are worth surfing through. One, for example, is in Italy, there is a slow food movement gastronomy award. That's pretty awesome. I would highly recommend that you kind of check through all the bits and bobs. You may find something really interesting that appeals to you specifically. Moving on. Okay, so what are the components of the application? We're going to start with the big ones first, which is study and research in the arts. So there's going to be a general online application, and then you're going to have 2 essays. The first one is the big one, which is your statement of purpose. And what you're going to be covering there is, okay, they're going to give you money for 9 to 12 months. Exactly what's your plan that you're going to do with that money? You are going to tell them about what kind of research you want to conduct, why it's important, what companies or uh, faculty in that country that you might be working with, or what research you're going to be doing, what organizations, that kind of thing. They're also going to want a general plan. If you're there for 9 months, that means you've got essentially 3 months to get on the ground and start to prepare your research, do preliminary research, potentially 3 months to go out and survey people in the research that you're doing, and then 3 months to write up a project or report at the end, kind of present your information. So this can actually take up a lot of space. 2 pages is pretty darn brief, but there's a good way to go about this. And again, over the course of the year, we'll be happy to coach you on some of the tips and tricks that we've learned about doing all of this application work. But it's important to know that that's going to be kind of your big explanation of why should I get this money? What am I going to do with it? The next essay you're going to have to write is 1 page of a personal statement. And this is going to be your personal explanation. Okay, you told them what you're going to do with the money. And now you have to explain, why did I want to go to this place? Why did I want to do this research? And why would Fulbright be interested in having me specifically do this research? And this is kind of your own personal declaration of whatever connectivity you might have with this country already. What you might know. A lot of people may touch on the fact that they're particular. This is the cultures. This is the home of their ancestry. That they're connected to it. And they want to be more involved in it. They may point to any majors or minors that may have been associated with this country and this culture. So that's kind of an opportunity for you to share why this place is so important to you. A good example is my cousin, who actually got 2 Fulbrights. She got a research one and she got an ETA. This was where she went and studied in Germany. She did research in German language and literature. And this was where she shared that this was part of her personal family history, and that's part of her connection, and that she had been really fascinated with all of the different artists and authors and so forth in Germany, that kind of thing. So those are the 2 big essays that you write. Additionally, you're going to need, as a study and research person, a letter of affiliation. And that is the person that you will be essentially mentored by while you are in this country. So when you're going abroad to do this research, everybody knows that you're going to be potentially a little green around the edges. You may be interested in, doing disease research. You may have a degree in molecular biology, but now you need to be coached under somebody who's doing that work in this country. And that's why they need to know that you're not just going to be kind of out there alone. You've got somebody who's going to be guiding you along the way. Again, these are more, we're going to have more info sessions to talk about cultivating a good letter of affiliation. You're going to need recommendations, you're going to need a transcript, and depending on where it is you go, you're going to need a foreign language evaluation. It's really key to note, not every single country is going to require you to speak the local language, but if your research demands it, you're going to need to know enough language to get around and do your research. So that's worth thinking about as well. Additionally, I just want to highlight the fact that yes, they do ask for your transcripts, but it's really important to note that they are not solely taking on people with straight 4.0s for the Fulbright program. Yeah, it's very reputable, but their number one concern is not, hey, were you the smartest in your class, but rather, does your research proposal make sense? Is it something that the United States wants to back? Do they think you're going to get it done? So that's why these 2, the personal statement and the statement of purpose, are really the more critical elements of your application. Thank you. Let's go over to the ETA. So the ETA, a briefer application. Your statement of purpose and personal statement are going to blend together a little bit more because you're not going to be doing a very large project. You are predominantly going to be on this program so that you can teach English. So this is going to touch in a little bit more with your interest in English education or your interest in that particular country. I do want to say that this year, We had one of our advisors, her name is Rachel, Wright. She's spectacular. She's been advising for ETAs. She sat in on the committees this year who were reviewing all of the ETA applicants, and you get to kind of see behind the scenes and understand, who moves forward and who doesn't. It's really key to note for the English teaching assistantships that you do not have to have taught children or students, and you don't even need to know the foreign language of the country that you're going to. But they do want to make sure that you have basically been in a position of leadership, conveying information to a group of people, not just a one-on-one tutor situation, but that you've kind of feel comfortable in a classroom style scenario. So maybe you're thinking to yourself, man, I've never learned how to be a teacher. I've never taught a class. I don't know if I could do this. Were you ever a camp counselor? Did you ever lead were you ever in a student organization and you had a leadership role? Those types of things are going to be what they look for when you are applying for this program. And again, more to come, but worth thinking of if you were trying to decide whether or not this might be for you. Okay, ready? Let's move on. Okay, so now we're getting to the nitty-gritty of this year, and you're going to see a lot of TBDs on this slide because the information is not available yet, but it will become so, and then we'll do another one of these info sessions so that people can understand what we're doing. But the timeline is uniformly the same. From this point right now, the video that you're watching in February, now is the time to, all the way up until August of this year, now is the time to start designing your project and thinking about what is it I want to do. You can meet with campus advisors to start plotting out how you're going to be writing your essays or what your plan might be or which particular program you're going to apply for, and you're going to prepare your application. I'm going to describe on the next slide the full extent of the application process, but we will have a internal campus deadline, and that's going to be approximately the middle of August. What this means is then you will submit your application, and we, as the University of Michigan Fulbright team, will review your application and assign you an opportunity to have an interview. Now, this interview is not going to be the deciding factor on whether or not you get accepted to Fulbright, but it is meant to help you enhance your application. We give you feedback, and it also helps us explain back to Fulbright that, hey, we met you. You're not just an average applicant. We can speak to the type of work that you intend to do. I'll explain all of this in just a moment. Following the interview and feedback and endorsement process, which takes place between September and October, we then send you back your application for you to complete, and then you must resubmit it by the Fulbright national deadline. Let's say, for example, you were really stuck in the weeds, you didn't have an opportunity, and you did not submit your application by the application deadline. It's important to know we are not the final deciders. The Fulbright National Committee is. So if you missed us, hey, that's fine. You can still submit by the Fulbright national deadline. And again, that's going to be announced, and it's probably going to be sometime in October, maybe a little bit early, maybe in the middle of October, but that will be your official deadline. Following submission of your application on the national deadline, then comes the initial screening period. And what that means is then your application and everybody else's is sent to a screening committee throughout the United States, where a bunch of State Department officials and area studies researchers will get together and review the applications that came in that year. And that's kind of their weeding out period. They make a determination about who's going to pass the bar to get into the final review committee in the different countries. So again, we have kind of this two-step process to help you get over that, and then get to be a finalist. But that's where the first kind of weeding out occurs. After the National Screening Committee has determined who it is they're going to send forward, they will give out a lot of finalist notifications in January. We just received ours. I did a good job. This year we had 50 people who made it through the National Screening Committee and are now semifinalists. Those people then go on to the in-country commissions and embassies and the Foreign Scholarship Board to make a determination about who is going to ultimately receive the fellowships. And once you've made it to this stage, you have kind of a 50-50 chance about whether or not you're going to get the Fulbright Award. Those notifications then will come out in about March to May so that you can then prepare for whether or not you're going to be going on to a Fulbright in fall of 2022. Let's dive a little bit into application deadline and process. So once again, we will be sending out to you when the deadline is. You're going to be able to see when the campus deadline is. If you submit your completed application online by the deadline, that locks you in for a lot of great benefits. One, you're going to receive feedback on your entire application. We'll be able to point out like, hey, you missed this. So if you're already going to be getting a lot of review drafts if you talk to our advisors, but you will also have an opportunity to have this kind of final draft review. And you'll get a review from different faculty members on the campus committee who will also be looking at your application. In addition to that, you will get signed up for an interview. Now, as I mentioned before, this interview will not weed out anybody. While there is a campus committee review and we do take it seriously, we expect it to be a little bit like an internship or a job interview where you dress up nicely, you come prepared, and you're going to be arguing for your project and why you think you would be a good applicant. This will be in front of a panel, this campus committee of people who are either aware of the type of work you want to do or are familiar with the area that you're potentially applying to. And these people will review your project suggestions and your application, give you feedback, and then we will write up an endorsement. As I said before, we don't weed people out here. The only reason that the University of Michigan would not endorse you is if we think that you are a danger to yourself, or if we think that you might be a danger to the country that you are going to and the people there. That is a rare occurrence. What will happen is this interview will be the opportunity for you to either be endorsed or very strongly endorsed. This gives us a chance to really tell the Fulbright National Committee, hey, this is a person worth paying attention to. We strongly encourage you to consider their application. They definitely should get a Fulbright. And that's what you're rooting for. That process will happen between September and October. And if you submit your application online by August, we will then follow up with you to set up this interview time. After you've had your interview, we will unsubmit your application back to you. That then gives you the opportunity to go in and make some final edits, correct anything that you want, work a little bit with your application reader, and prepare. Then you must resubmit your final version of your application by the deadline set at the national deadline. We strongly encourage you to submit it as early as possible following that campus committee review and endorsement, because we know that sometimes those application deadlines can creep up on you and you don't want to be excluded from Fulbright because of a technical error. But it's important to note, keep yourself on the ball. And then again, that Fulbright national deadline is going to come up in October 2021. Keep your eyes out for when that official date comes. But by that time, you must have all of your application, all of your essays, all of your affiliates and recommendations in by that date. Wow. That's the process. That's the general process of the program and how it will work this year and for most of the years to come. So let's talk a little bit now about upcoming opportunities to start getting more information. So now you've heard all the basics, you can review it a million times, you can hear my voice as you research all of your Fulbright stuff, and there's more to come. One will be the next session, which is we're going to have a Fulbright conversation hour on February 25th, where I'm not going to rehash much of this stuff. I'm just going to be available. It's kind of like a sit down, brown bag, lunch, coffee chat opportunity that if you have some personal questions that you'd like to ask about your particular thoughts on Fulbright, I heartily welcome them. You are also welcome to just sit in there and just, I don't know, to breeze through and have your cup of coffee or your sandwich and listen to other students ask questions. Sometimes you don't know, but what you don't know. So it can be really beneficial to hear other people ask questions and have me kind of speak ad hoc about it. And I love to talk. So you're welcome to join us, whatever your proclivity. Additionally, you should know in the months to come, we're going to have more Fulbright application workshops. Some of these have already been recorded and they're on that the Fulbright resources page. You can go and look at the previous web recordings. What we'll cover are things like, okay, which award is the right award for me? How to get references and affiliates. That's where I come in and talk a little bit about building your network, both in the United States and in the country you're going to. We'll also cover the statement of purpose, how to propose a research project. So if the research opportunity is particularly appealing to you, but you've never written up an independent research project before, one of our advisors, Dr. Ann Takata, she's spectacular in helping people prepare to write these research projects. She does a really great info session, so I encourage you to look at those. And additionally, check out the IIE Fulbright webinars. Get it straight from the horse's mouth. Go and check out the National Committee's perspective on what it is that they're looking for. Who knows? I know I don't have all the answers. I'm sure they're going to have a lot of really great information. They are also, I really want to say this about IIE, they are spectacular about responding. You should feel comfortable at any point if you have questions for the application. We love your questions, but you should also feel comfortable reaching out to IIE directly. That's what they're there for. They're happy to give you information about the application in general. Fulbright sessions, as you are seeing now, are recorded, so they'll often be up. If you miss one of these sessions, the recording of them will be up at least 1 week after recording. I may not record things like the coffee chat, so if you don't see those, don't be surprised, because I want those to be kind of just an opportunity for people to have a nice conversation and not feel, too self-conscious with their questions. So, an FYI. Let me introduce you to the fantastic University of Michigan Fulbright Advisors. Right there, smack in the middle, is Heather Johnson. She has an elevated position because Heather has been doing this now for over a decade. She is well-versed in Fulbright in every area. She's fantastic at working with students and helping to hone their applications and their essays. And in addition to that, she is one of the main reasons for why the University of Michigan is incredibly successful at creating Fulbright awardees. So just for your awareness, many universities will send in a lot of applicants, but the University of Michigan has been in the top 20 awardee group universities for about the last 20 years. In many places, we've been the #1 university at establishing Fulbright awardees. And part of that reason is because of the organization and advice of Heather Johnson. On the regular, many students have, we have, I think, a 25% success rate. So if you're considering applying for this program, there's a 1 in 4 chance you're going to get the Fulbright that you're applying for, simply because we have set up this great committee process. So just one more reason for why you might want to submit your application by the campus deadline. Finally, outside of Heather, who's brilliant, we have Rachel Wright and Dan Cameron. As I mentioned to Rachel before, both she and Dan are very good advisors for the ETA program. And then you'll see on the right side, Dr. Takata and myself, Melissa Burt, we do the research and the study opportunities. I'm particularly prevalent on the Fulbright study opportunities, and Dr. Takata is very well versed in the research opportunities. Again, everybody is able to advise you on any of these programs, but those are kind of our specialties. Oh, and then for those of you who are interested in the arts, that's kind of Heather's bag. She does a great job on it, but we're all available and able to help you no matter what your interests are. Last but not least, let's say you're particularly interested in this program, and especially you are a freshman or sophomore And you know that this may not be the year that you apply for this program, but you're thinking, hey, maybe it's something I want to do in the future. First of all, awesome. I'm so glad that you're here. And second of all, why don't you try and diversify your portfolio? Fulbright is a great gateway fellowship. This is a good opportunity for you to cut your teeth on all sorts of different federal programs that can offer you money to get you out of this country. So let's check out some other options that you could look at even in the next upcoming weeks. One is, oh, darn, it happened just yesterday. My apologies, but there's always opportunities there. The Peace Corps Prep Program is always running. It runs on a rolling basis. Highly encourage you to go check that out. That's with the International Center. Kelly Nelson is a delight, and she loves bringing people who are interested in the Peace Corps program. Peace Corps is a little bit more on the adventurous side for people who are particularly interested in getting abroad into kind of the lesser known areas of the world, or rather the not so anglicized areas of the world. This particular session that I had up here for Thursday, February 11th was a health and safety conversation, but I do know that they'll be doing another big info session, I think, on February 15th. I encourage you to go check it out and keep abreast of all of their different info sessions. Another place that you can go check out is the Office of National Scholarships and Fellowships, which is run by Dr. Henry Dyson and Katie Gass. They are spectacular people, and they have a number of really fantastic opportunities. One such selection of opportunities is the UK scholarships. So if you are coming to Fulbright because you are particularly interested in an opportunity to do a study program in the UK, you may have already looked at the International Institute of Education's Fulbright websites and seen that there's just master's programs from the UK all the way down the list. While we are incredibly successful at supporting students who are interested in those programs, it is worth noting that they are highly competitive. So if you're like, I want to get to the UK or bust, and you're applying for a Fulbright program, you might as well be talking with Henry and finding out about all sorts of other UK scholarships. So we strongly encourage you, if you have a UK bend, that you go and check out some of the other things that they're offering over at ONSF. Let's say that you're interested in being an English teacher and you want to apply for the ETA program, but you're thinking to yourself, man, I never did. I was never a camp counselor. I didn't teach any kids. I never led a group. I'll never be able to get that. Not so fast, my friends, because there is, oh, whoops, I'm jumping. I apologize. I'm looking at the English Language Institute conversation circles. We'll talk about that. We'll come back over to the Michigan Library Scholars Internship in just a second. So back into the storytelling. So for the English teaching opportunities, if you are particularly interested in trying to apply for that and you want to showcase that you have the ability to go and teach a group about English, now is the perfect time to check out the English Language Institute's conversation circles. So there are a wide swath of international students on the University of Michigan campus, and they are dying to become more versed in colloquial English. That is why the conversation circles were born. Now, they just closed up their conversation circles for the winter period, but the next registration period will be in May. And hey, that's a perfect time to sit in and give it a shot because you'll be doing it before the application deadline. What you'll be doing is a really great service to the university as well. You will be leading a conversation period and trying to come up with engaging conversational topics and ideas to get people to really kind of come out of their shell who are who are native speakers of different languages to come and try on English a little bit. So here's a great way to kind of cut your teeth on English teaching. Now, backing it up a little bit, to the Michigan Library Scholars Internships. This would be for people who are particularly interested in research and study. Say you've never really done research before, but you are really intrigued by the research opportunities. Well, have you considered applying for the Michigan Library Scholars Internships? These are opportunities for you to help people who are research and scholars, and you can do it as somebody who's particularly interested in international relations and global studies. And they can help you prepare for, well, what does it mean to do this kind of research? What does it mean to do an independent study project? And the best thing about it is you get paid for it because it's an internship. And who doesn't like a librarian? They're delightful. So these are great opportunities for you to start thinking about before you even apply to the Fulbright program. Say, what other things can I cut my teeth on to see what programs I'd really be interested in? I highly recommend that you check these things out, and we'll try and give you more things to look at outside of Fulbright so that you know what other options you have and where you can put eggs in a lot of different baskets. Oh, is that it? Hold on. Nope. Come on, friend. There we go. Did I miss anything? No. Sorry about that. So, last but not least, if we, I know one day we're going to make it back to our offices. So, if you are seeing this in the summer, perhaps we're already back there. You want to find out where we are. The International Institute Fellowship and Grants Office is located in Suite 300 in Weiser Hall on the third floor. We're always happy to see you. You can contact us via the iifellowships@umich.edu email address. You can find us for advising at our advising link listed right here. You can also come to the International Institute Fulbright website. That's another place to get started. I'll have a lot of these links there. And then finally, the Fulbright resources site. Keep checking into these places. We'll have updates as we go along. And there's always an opportunity for you to learn more about the program or research more. And I think that's about it. Just checking, and it looks like it is about it. Once again, thank you so much for listening to this. If you've made it thus far, just between you and me, I'm so glad that you're considering doing the Fulbright program. This is amazing. We've seen so many fantastic people do really incredible, innovating stuff. And no matter your background, no matter your interest, no matter how scholarly your pursuits have been in the last couple of years, you need to know that everybody and anybody can apply for this program. And there is a grant or a scholarship that it will probably appeal to you. I highly recommend that you check this out. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors. This is really great. And then if you really like this, make sure you check out our International Institute website for more opportunities outside of Fulbright. Because this is just the beginning. And if you came this far, you might as well check out some other really great stuff. Thanks again for joining us, and I hope that you'll see us at another info session. It's been a pleasure.